Great. Thanks so much, folks, for coming. Today is Wednesday, August 24th, 2022. We have a really great panel set up for today where we're going to talk about careers in consulting. Friendly reminder that the Slack channel that we'll be using is called Meetup Consulting Careers. Please do go ahead and tell us where you're calling in from. I love seeing all the time zones represented. Really sorry for the Australia folks for whom it's 1 a.m., but hopefully you catch the recording. A couple of things. If you're in a place where you can turn on your camera, please do. It's a lot easier for our participants to not feel like they're talking to a bunch of Zoom screens. So that would be great. Number two, please do go ahead and ask questions in the chat. If you ask a question in the chat and we get to it, I will ask you to come off mute and ask your question yourself. If you're in a place where you can do that, where you can come off mute and ask your question, that's great. If not, I will verbalize your question for you. Otherwise, let's go ahead and get started. So if we can go through our panelists and start with introductions. So Callie, you joined the call first. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us who you are, where you work, how long you've been working there, and how your experience in consulting, maybe in just a couple sentences.
Yeah, for sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Callie White. I'm based out of BC, Canada. And currently I'm working as a senior analytics engineering consultant at Montreal Analytics. I just passed my 1-year anniversary, I think last week. So it's been exactly a year in consulting.
Thank you. And Megan, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Hello, I'm Megan. I am a lead analyst at Brooklyn Data Company, which is a data and analytics consultancy, and I've been there for about 1.5 years, and that is my only consulting experience.
And Michael.
Hi, everybody. It's Michael Helbling. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm the managing partner at an analytics consultancy called Stacked Analytics, which I founded in 2020. And I've been doing analytics consulting off and on for about 18 years in different firms. So
I love that. So a wide variety of experiences here today, which I think will make for a really great panel. Why don't I have some questions to get us started, but then I'm hoping that we can actually turn this into a Q&A from the audience. Thinking about each of your experiences working in-house versus in consulting, what are the 1 or 2 things that really jump out to you as fundamentally different about working in-house versus consulting for a client? And I'm going to throw the question out there at the beginning because it's one thing that always comes up with consulting is like how much of your job is sales and upsales. So maybe let's go in reverse order from the intros. Michael, Megan, Callie.
yeah, so this question, obviously, I've worked on both sides, and the easiest way I always describe it is consulting gives you a lot of breadth of experiences, and working in-house usually gives you a lot of depth of experiences. That's in a general way. There's lots of exceptions to that, but that's sort of at the top level of how I would describe the differences. There's a much bigger conversation like what's entailed in consulting, but I want to let the other 2 panelists go, so I'm going to shut up at this point and let them go.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I definitely agree that it's easier to work a little more broadly, be a bit more of a generalist as a consultant than to specialize. To specialize, you kind of have to work yourself to define that path. For me personally, as an IC, I don't deal with sales that much. I'm cognizant of it. I'm kind of like an ear on the ground if I hear a client mention a tool, or I realize that they have a use case for some of the tooling and infrastructure that we're used to and that we have partnerships with. But I'm lucky that at my consultancy, we have a partnerships team that deals with that. So I'm able to kick a client contact to that team when sales needs to get involved. So I can be a liaison, but I'm not directly responsible. I'll kick it to Callie.
Yeah, I would echo what Megan said around the sales portion of that. My job really isn't sales. It's to figure out the best solution for a client, regardless of whether that's new tooling or just building out data infrastructure. The things that I would say that are different about consulting, the biggest change for me is that I'm not working with my internal stakeholders. In previous life, when I was in-house, I was very closely tied to people that were actually using the data on a day-to-day basis. Now those conversations tend to go through the data team of a client. So it's a little bit different there. And then in terms of depth versus breadth, it's a lot of breadth of tools, but also a lot of depth of tools. Where I really miss the depth now is that I don't have the context on a client's data or their business logic or exactly what their business does. Again, we're reliant on the client to provide that information, where we're just the experts on the tools and how to build this.
So let's dig into that a little bit more. Callie, back to you. Can you maybe paint a picture for people who have never done consulting work on what that looks like? You get asked like, hey, we want to understand how customer retention affects how customer usage affects retention. What are the questions you might ask? How do you then engage or work with someone on the other side of the table?
Yeah, so the questions that I would ask kind of to start off with is there any existing solutions for this right now? How are you monitoring that right now? Whether it's in maybe a tool like Salesforce or some other external tools, just to get us started somewhere. And then I would ask, what is your definition of retention? Trying to get some of the high level pieces of that. With that, I would start combining it with some of the knowledge I have on how can we best build this model. So does retention look like an event model of consumers where we're tracking all of their different events in like a very, very long table? Things like that, to start building together a solution and trying to figure out what their data source is and what that definition is.
Megan, Michael, anything you want to add there? No, cool. I think that's a great way to paint a picture for what that initial information gathering sounds like and looks like, because if you don't have context on what you're working on, like you have to do that information gathering every time, right? So if there's I think we're all in kind of alignment that there is a different way to approach problems when you're working in-house versus from a consulting perspective. How does that manifest on things like career ladders? So what are things that might appear on a career ladder for a data practitioner in consulting that wouldn't appear in-house, or vice versa?
That's a big question.
Maybe just one example or.
Yeah, like I think in the world of consulting, what I've observed over the years and sort of what I personally experienced is as you go through your career, it sort of follows sort of these phases, and I'm not going to time box them, but the first is sort of like, how do I do this? How do I do consulting? How do I fit in this company that I'm part of, and learning the ropes, just how it all works. Then it's sort of, how do I get ahead? How do I progress myself? We all need to progress in our careers. So how do I learn how to like advance? And when you're more junior in your career, I think you have a high level of motivation to kind of accelerate and grow to the level that you can achieve, because you've got goals and things you want to do. And then I think at some point, if you're going to be in consulting, there's this period of life where you're like, do I really like this or not? Like hashtag work-life balance, basically. Because consulting usually asks a little more of your week than you might. Now, every company's different, right? So like if you work for Amazon, they also ask a lot of everybody on their team. I think it's what I've heard. But some corporations, big companies, whatever, like you don't have to work super hard. When I worked in industry, like I'm old, so like we didn't even take laptops home. Like we shut our computers off and didn't think about work when we left the office. Like what a concept, right? But then eventually, once you start figuring that out, I think you go to sort of a place of, let me find the best firm and team that fits my style, right? So now that I kind of know what I'm about and what I like, it's less about the money, the position, those things. It's about getting myself into the right group, the right kind of company, the right kind of culture. And so like those are the phases that I see people go through. And it's good to know that like what I observe is like the people who are the least happy are usually the people that are struggling at the tail end of one of those phases of trying to figure out like, how do I progress through this, or like it, or they're just always like, I always want to get ahead and sort of have a dollar figure in mind of like, how am I getting more money? And they keep jumping into companies that actually aren't great fits, and don't match their style and don't match their cultural needs, and they just end up in like really unrewarding, and you end up going from company to company. And it's hard too, because companies aren't always like really great at being real honest with you about what their culture is really like. So you kind of have to develop a radar for things and understand, like, when they say work hard, play hard, what exactly do they mean, right? And it's like, does that just mean we're going to grind you to dust and ask you to work like 60 hours a week? Or is it really like we do embrace a culture of fun and like collaboration and stuff? Okay, that's all.
Megan, I saw you nodding pretty intensely there. Do you want to add something?
No, I really resonate with what Michael's saying in terms of some of those phases. I don't think I've, probably gone through them as much as Michael, but I've definitely had like moments in each phase that Michael mentioned. I definitely agree with the cultural fit piece. At my current company, I feel lucky that, they're very good about saying like, you're working 40 hours and that's it. But when you're on in those 40 hours, like you're really on because you're managing right across clients and you're making lots of split decisions constantly. You're reprioritizing not only against the client itself, but across clients. And so it's really important in those moments to have like a team culture that you like, because you're going to be, a little bit stressed from time to time. And so it's really nice to have supportive people around you when that's going on. And sometimes for me, that even matters more, like the internal team culture, than the client itself, because that's the thing that persists. Clients come and go, but that team you're with, that you're helping build and you're learning from, is really what helps you advance your own career as well. And so I find that is such a key piece. So I'm glad that Michael brought that up.
That's awesome. Anything you've seen on your career ladders that you want to call out as being something that's fundamentally different from an in-house career ladder, Callie or Megan?
I would say that where I saw the difference was when I was in-house consulting. In my last role, I had started down a bit of a management path, was managing a team of analytics, directing quarterly OKRs, managing project roadmaps, all of these things to kind of put me on that path, and realizing that it was taking a lot more of my energy, and I felt like I was really drifting away from the like technical knowledge and being really deep in the tools and being kind of in the weeds, and realizing that that was what I really enjoyed. Additionally, when I thought about leaving my job, I also was really invested in the more junior members that I had mentored, and teaching and kind of developing others in their career and how they use those tools. So for me, it was while I was in-house that I was picking out these pieces that I really liked or really disliked, and consulting along with right place, right time really fit all those pieces for me, in that my whole entire job is teaching other people how to use these tools now, without really the bureaucratic external management structures that I was in before, where I'm leading a whole team. I get to be more of a assistant consultant to a whole team of external data employees, as opposed to managing my own team.
For me, I think that as an IC, it's not too different than being in-house, but I would say the ability to be more of a generalist is a bit different. Sometimes in-house, you're very siloed in like what you can actually do or what you're allowed to touch. And kind of as a consultant, you're given a lot more freedom because you have to pitch in more, and you can learn kind of the adjacent aspects of your work versus just getting someone to hand off something to you. I think once you move up or you want to be on the manager track, I do think that depending on how in-house runs a data team, you are more of like a product manager on a consulting team because your team is kind of your product. And I find that in-house, a lot of times it's the, director of data or the manager who owns a roadmap or owns those kind of decision-making pieces. And instead in a consultancy, they really like own the team. And that is, that work can be distributed however. And so that's where I see the career part diverge a little bit from in-house, is on that kind of management track. I don't know if others had a similar experience.
I'm seeing heads that kind of bob.
Yeah, I remember, so I started in consulting, and then after about 3.5 years went over on the industry side. And at the end of orientation, I raised my hand and I was like, where do I enter my time? And they were like, well, we don't do that here. So like, I had no idea. So those kinds of things, there's definitely those mismatches or whatever. But Callie, you brought up a super good point about that's one of those big branches for people. And I don't think it's just consulting, it's every career path, trying to figure out how do I want to grow, and is management the only way forward, or can I grow into sort of a higher level or more senior individual contributor type of role. And that's in consulting. What you can do there is think about what kind of firm I'm being a part of or creating, because there's different problems to solve in the consulting world. There's a really good book by a guy named David Meister called Managing a Professional Services Firm, which I highly recommend. It's old but applicable. But he kind of breaks down in something sort of like there's these 4 different areas, if you will. So like if you think about like a brain surgeon comes in and they do surgery, but they're highly specialized. Everyone else lays all the groundwork. They come in and they get paid a ton of money to do one thing super duper well with a ton of expertise. They just come in, they're rock stars, they do their thing. And then you have on the other side, you have nurses who do all of the work, and all that in some consulting firms, like they're boots on the ground, they're handling the vitals and they're making sure things are happening on time. They're delivering the things that have to happen. No less vital than a brain surgeon, but a different role and more broadly applicable. And so like some consulting firms will do that. Some consulting firms are more like therapy, where you're kind of like finding problems to solve and guiding the exploration and the outcomes of those problems, and figuring out like, hey, no one's ever solved this before. Like, how are we going to do this? And then there's also sort of like this idea of a pharmacy, which is basically like, I got a prescription that I have to fill and the cheapest one wins, right? And so the consulting firm to give me the best price on what everyone's doing right now is a GA4 migration for Google Analytics. So the best price on that, I'll just hire those people, right? So that's an example. So you can kind of think about firms in a similar way and do those things. And so as you look at your career and you're like, hey, I want to really advance my career to be a deeply specialized professional, then the kinds of firms that will start to appeal to you over time might be the therapist or the brain surgeon types of firms, as opposed to, the pharmacy or the other ones, So anyways, that's a way to sort of conceptualize how you might apply that in consulting as you find your path.
Yeah, and Caitlin dropped a link to the book in the Slack channel. So thank you, Caitlin, for that. Sounds like a great framework if you really want to double down on understanding more about what careers in consulting can look like. Let's take our first question from the panel or from the audience. Bhavik, I see your video on. Can you come off mute?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. Yeah, so the question is like, even I work in consulting. We just help our clients get onto the modern data stack and help with their data journey. It's always, we're looking at new use cases every time. And, it gets difficult to know all the tools, or even some have some context around the new tools that are coming up in the market, and maybe the existing ones as well, which I haven't had exposed to. How I believe is that we need to consistently keep out some time and just, go freely just check them out as you wish. But like, how do you manage that with the work and everything?
Yeah, that's a great question. From my experience at Brooklyn Data, we have two things set up which help with that a lot. One is we have a concept of 20% time, where 20% of our time is not done on client work. So we have that time to do professional development or to explore, which, that's very nice. So that might not apply to everyone. Another thing we have is our partnerships team is constantly bringing in new tools to do demos for our group. And usually with a demo, that tool or service will give us a sandbox to play in for free. And so that also helps. I think we use a lot of shared knowledge, because we have, people across so many different clients with different use cases. So it's also really important to document those use cases for the rest of the team. So when someone kind of on our team becomes the first person to apply a tool on a client, they do a lot of documentation, both on the tooling itself, but then also cross comparing it to other tools in the same space. So those things combined have made it pretty easy for me as an IC to be able to do that. But yeah, there's, you can read forever about all the new tooling that's out there as well. I'll let others speak.
I was going to let you go first if you wanted to, Callie. I didn't know.
I would say we have very similar structures set up at Montreal Analytics. So yeah, totally echo that with having non-client time and internal sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's two things about that that's really important, and it's a really great question. One of the things to look for is the company you're working for. Sometimes consultancies and historically like agencies have sort of tried to bite off more than they can chew sometimes. So back in my day, sorry to go, like when analytics was really old, if you did analytics back in like the early 2000s, people had just assumed you also did SEO, for instance. So like my company would just assign me to SEO projects early in my career because you do analytics. So obviously you must also know SEO. Like there's no way to manage that. So like your firm also has to support like the knowledge that we actually own. So we don't answer like there's this perverse incentive, right, to sort of pretend you can do everything for everybody. And so first your company has to like not do that. The second is you have to be interested. And I love the examples from, Megan and Callie, because I think that's the way that's done right, is like, hey, we're encouraging you to learn. I would also say like there's no substitute for your own curiosity. And I'm probably the worst example in the world of like how to do work-life balance. Like I love my field and I love what I do. And so I'm incessantly on like, I probably have 8 different Slack groups that I'm a part of that are analytics or data related. And now even one Discord that I'm involved with. And I'm on Twitter all the time. I even started a podcast because I like talking to people about data. So like, I'm just endlessly fascinated. So some gradients there, right, between my obsession and a normal person. You just sort of pick your lane, I think.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, I'm definitely gonna talk to my team members and ask our founder to have some time especially for that. If that sounds good. Thank you.
And there's probably a chance there for me to plug Locally Optimistic as a great way to try to keep a pulse on things that are constantly growing and changing and some of the conversations that are happening. At least that's how I use LO. So thank you very much for that question. We have another question from Martend. Martend, are you in a place where you can come off mute and ask?
Yeah, sure. I need to go back. Yeah. So first question that I asked is, do you need to start with some sort of data auditing and business process auditing before you can effectively propose a solution?
Yeah, so I think this was asked after the comment I had made about getting context. So I would say it's really dependent on the client and the project that we are taking on. But we do health checks is what we'll call them on some of the existing instances just to see where the project's at, look at performance issues or whether that's meeting your needs, identify some best practices that we can implement, things like this, to kind of lay the groundwork for the foundation of what we're setting up. So we'll do processes like that. In terms of business process auditing, I wouldn't say that we really audit it, but in the data modeling process and figuring out how we can best answer a problem, we do use a framework called BEAM to help us answer some of those questions. And it lines up with dimensional modeling. It's kind of a Kimball-esque type structure. But that's the way that we would do kind of this business process auditing to really get the full picture of what they're trying to answer.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Martin, you had another question. Did you want to go ahead and dive in?
Yeah, sure. So Michael, you talked about understanding if you're a good fit to the culture of a consulting organization. So how do you speed up the process of understanding the fit?
That's a great question. I saw that in the chat and I was like trying to think, yeah, how do you do that? There's this thing I say, and I probably didn't make it up because I steal stuff from people all the time, but I always say real recognizes real, which is like when you like just you meet somebody and you're like, oh yeah, we're on the same wavelength. And it's not necessarily even something that gets said or whatever, because a lot of times companies like I used to run a much larger consulting practice within a company, and we were, you know, really big and it was great. And I worked really hard to like make a great team. And at the same time, like we would go for these like Inc. 500 or, you know, best place to work type of awards. And it's like such BS. Like those awards are all BS. And it's like, what's the culture on the ground really like? What's the culture in the work? How do we treat each other on the projects? And that's the way to actually know, like, is this place going to be like, if my manager is screaming at people, like, is that something that's like allowed here? Or is that like, are they going to get counseled on that? Or what's going to happen? You know, like those kinds of things, like, because that's what's going to tell you, like, is this a fit for me or not? Because if you have the right team or whatever, like then those are the right things. And then the other thing is, do you feel aligned to the vision and the leadership, right? So what is the company trying to accomplish? How transparent is leadership about what they're about? Consulting by its nature is I guess the way I would say it is, the biggest bugaboo about consulting is time. Because basically what you're doing is you're selling time as a product, and that can turn into some very weird incentive structures, and it can make an environment where people start feeling undervalued and uninspired really quickly. Because like all you have going on is people coming after you and be like, hey, why didn't you bill so many hours last week? I can't believe you didn't bill enough hours last week. And it's like, is that all you care about what I do, is like how many hours I bill? Well, on one level, yeah, because that's how the firm makes money. So it's not wrong, but like, how do you balance that? And so how a company treats that and the balance of what the business needs to operate versus what people need to be successful, that's how you're going to be able to tell, like, hey, is this a good culture? Is this a good company?
And it's always great practice when you're interviewing at any company, not just a consulting firm, to really dig into understanding the hiring manager's leadership style, things that are important to them, how they approach problems. I was asked in a conversation earlier in the week, tell me about a time you had a conflict with a peer and how you worked through it. And I think the candidate's goal was to understand how I work through problems. And that's a great sort of question that you can use when you're interviewing for a job in consulting, in-house, or really doing just about anything. Sunny drops a question in the chat. Sunny, are you in a place where you can come off mute and verbalize?
Yes, let me see here. 1 second. Hi, okay, so maybe you can see me now.
Yes.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, so I'm actually an evangelist for a BI company, analytics company, but I've done consulting in the past, and I've hired a lot of companies to do consulting. But you know, when I look to hire consulting companies, I try to figure out companies that were literally operating in my area locally, right, to work with. But that got me thinking, and you know, if I were going to go look for, you know, a career in consulting again, what are you doing? How are you finding companies locally, regionally, nationally that are best fit for you guys? Or what advice would you give in that case?
Yeah, I can jump in here. And I think just from my personal experience, I'd actually first encountered Montreal Analytics through a blog post where I was looking for a different solution to a problem that I was solving in-house. And that kind of was my initial engagement with them, and really helped me to understand that they're trying to give the knowledge back to the community, as much in like a paid way through consulting, but also in an accessible way through just sharing this through blog posts and other things. So I think in the course of whatever you may be doing now, again, keeping an eye on the information that you're seeing and who that's coming from, I think can really point you in the right direction there.
Yeah, I'd add another plug. I found my current job through Locally Optimistic in the job postings channel. And part of that was like the type of jobs that were being posted in Locally Optimistic, like shared kind of common cultural values. I've become very skeptical of job descriptions as well, like finding words or phrases that are either red flags or indicators of some kind of like virtue signaling in terms of what a job might be like. You know, I stay away from jobs that, you know, can handle a challenging work environment. Like, what does that mean to you? Is that just a fire hose, or is that, you know, sustained learning and growth over time? And those things in job posts lead me to ask questions very early on in the recruiting process. I think in my 20s, I did not ask the right questions when I was going through jobs, you know, even at the end when you get to like the CEO or upper management, I did not take advantage of those times to just ask very blunt questions about what relationships and culture and leadership are like within the org. And so I think like figuring out to you first what the things that are important to you and having like a short list of those, and really looking at whether, you know, the communities you're in have networking and align with those same values that you're looking for. So I think some of it is also just doing a little bit of self and soul searching and reflection on like what it is that you're specifically looking for, instead of trying to mold yourself to a job application or post, to really make sure that it's a reflection of you and not, you know, you trying to fit yourself into their box.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah,
Can I follow the? Oh, I'm sorry, Michael.
No, it's okay. I was just gonna say, like, the idea of geography is, I feel like, has collapsed a little bit, and now I would say it's more about scale. So it's sort of like when you find a consulting firm, like what scale of companies are they dealing with, or what size of consulting firm do you want to work in? Because those will affect your experience quite a bit. But I think I feel like just even before COVID, you know, local versus regional versus national, really the only difference was sort of what scale of company. Because like if you're going to go pitch a multinational firm and you're like a tiny little consulting firm, one of the questions you may be asked in that process is like, well, how are you going to handle when our Germany folks call up and how you're going to service that group as well as you're going to, you know, help the companies, the people in the US. It's like, oh yeah, we don't have an office in Berlin. So the bigger consulting firms will be like, oh, we've got offices all over the world, right? So they can take those on. Whereas, you know, the smaller businesses or medium-sized businesses wouldn't be a fit for those firms because their overhead is too high, they charge too much. And so a more nimble firm or a smaller firm would be a better fit. So anyway, so I think it's more about scale as opposed to geography anyways, since definitely since COVID anyway.
Thank you. So can I ask one follow-up question to that? I don't want to hog all the time.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, you know, of you folks that are out there, there are pros and cons about blogging, maybe doing podcast or writing, or do you guys have recommendations for folks to say, you should be writing more, you should be posting more, you should be long form, short form, podcast? Are there any things there you would say pros and cons wise?
And maybe if I can tack on to that, we'll fit this again into the theme of today's conversation, specifically to a career in consulting.
I'll start. So I think if you go back to say like what makes the consulting firm work, you kind of have sort of 5 main categorical areas that have to get covered some way somehow. So there's marketing, becoming known for what you do. There's doing business development or selling, you know, that process. There's client delivery, which is actually the physically doing the project work and interacting with the client. There's building capability and expertise. And then there's the managing of the relationships and building longer term partnerships and nurturing the relationships that come through the client projects. So in the context of consulting, what you're talking about, Sunny, is that first part of like, how do we inform people about what it is that we do? And I don't know that there's a wrong answer for that, but what you're trying to do in a consulting context, if you're gonna go take on that activity, is you're trying to get FaceTime with other people to talk about what their specific challenges are and how you could solve them. And you can start, you know, the classic funnel approach, right? So if I wrote a blog post that was captured a bunch of people's attention and got one person to reach out to me to ask me more questions, you know, at my old company, like we're in Atlanta, there's a local beverage company here that our CEO had been trying to get into for years and years and years. They're pretty big. And one of my analysts wrote a blog post about some Google Analytics related thing. And we got a call from a director at Coke asking for a meeting. And I just said the name. Don't tell anybody that. Okay. And that ended up winning us a project. We hadn't been able to get into that firm or into that company at all before. And it's just sort of like, okay, that's bragging rights. That we got an RFP from a really large industrial manufacturer who had just so happened to listen to the podcast that I started, which, by the way, I had no idea. I had no freaking clue. And they were like, oh yeah, we invited you to this RFP because we found you on your pod. I was like, say what? And then when my CEO found out, he's like, so what can I do to support this podcast you're doing? Like, because now it's like, oh, we can get business from this. So I think there's no wrong answer to that. I think one of the other ways you could do it is contribute to communities like Locally Optimistic. If you're here answering people's questions, helping the community, that makes you stand out. And like, that's going to make your company stand out. That's going to make you get jobs. Like I think Megan, you said you got, you know, networked through Locally Optimistic to find your current role. It's a huge way. Okay, stop. I'm going to let other people talk now. Sorry.
Megan, you want to pick that up? Like, what does LO and networking in LO mean to you? Or Callie, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's nice to have a place to go when you just want to ask a question, whether it's a technical question or a personal question, or it's about your personal growth, or it's about, you know, I don't know, I'm stuck on this tool. Whatever that is, it creates a safe space where you feel comfortable asking questions and kind of feeling a part of something larger. Finding other people with similar experiences. Like as a woman, I really like being part of Locally Optimistic and seeing all these other, you know, fabulous people who look like me, you know, practicing data. And so I think it just can create for you like a safe space or environment. I'm lucky that I feel safe in my current job and environment, but I think if I didn't, I would really cling to a community like this to kind of like help me get through those times.
Callie, I see you off mute. Is there something you want to add there?
I think all of the above. I would just say that in addition to that, I really like the community aspect of Locally Optimistic, but I also find that I do engage a lot in tool specific Slack groups or whatever their platform happens to be, and that can help with kind of that depth of tooling knowledge, just to get really specific on those questions.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for those questions and those answers. I'm cognizant of where we are on time, so I'm going to take the last question here. How do you think of consulting versus working in-house in the arc of your career? We talk a lot about moving between management and IC work in technical spaces. We just recently held a panel where we had people talk about their own experience moving back and forth. When you think about, and you know, nobody has I forget what the thing is called, a crystal ball. Nobody can see the future. I'm not asking for you to give me your career timelines here, but how do you think of going back and forth? Is it something you see yourself doing, or do you think you can have a successful long-term career just in consulting or just in-house?
I think you absolutely can have a career in either, depending on what is going to suit you the best. I will say, maybe when I had a bit more of a plan around my career, and I was looking at that management arc, when I was reading a lot of the job descriptions and what companies were looking for in someone that was going to lead a data team, it was exactly what I'm doing now in terms of being able to implement the right tools and talk to the right people to get the right information about how to actually build a data structure and a data team that's going to support the business. So the way that I've applied that to my career by going into consulting is, I kept saying that I'm doing this cycle very efficiently, where I'm going to a lot of different companies in succession and being able to implement that solution for them without spending all the time being like totally onboarded and in their culture and getting all the context that I would need. So it's almost like I'm managing a data team by consulting for them and iterating over my career in doing that.
Getting a lot of reps in a short window. I love it.
Yeah, I'll piggyback onto that. I think I took this job in consulting thinking like, this is going to be a boot camp for me because I can get so many reps in with so many different types of clients and different industries with different stacks. And so for me, it was just like, I'm just going to try to learn as much as I can, however long this lasts. I enjoy it a lot more, honestly, than I thought I would. I really enjoy the communication aspect and really like learning how to build trust quickly with clients. That gives me a lot of joy, and being able to like teach and learn internally. And so like, I think if I ever got to a point where I didn't want to be a consultant anymore, I feel like I'd be really prepared to be in-house, just because you've kind of gone through that process with so many clients of being dropped into an org and having to figure out what's the current state of affairs, what's the pain points, what's the opportunities, how do I like build a vision for that while bringing people with me along the way, how do I teach them how to fish with data. And so I think like the skills that you learn in consulting can be obviously applied to consulting, but can really be applied to in-house as well, and set you up really well, I think, sometimes to be like that first data person at a startup, because you have to go through all those reps yourself as a consultant.
I think since I started my career in consulting one of the things I ran into was I felt like I was making all these recommendations to companies, but never staying to see the results. And so that made me want to go work for a company to like be part of the full process. And I did, and it, you know, it was really validating. At the same time, one of the challenges of working inside a company sometimes is there's not as much room for expansion or growth. Because like, let's say you want to get promoted, well, you have to just sort of wait till your boss is like also promoted or leaves so that you can. And so it's sort of like, well, if I feel like I'm ready now, do I have to go to a different company to get a promotion and those kinds of things? So it kind of led me back to consulting because like you can take so many different avenues. And over time, it sort of was the thing that fit me. And also, it just purely selfishly, I like to be in charge of what I'm doing. So eventually it led me to start my own company. And I've seen a lot of amazing data and analytics programs that people have built at companies just get nuked from orbit because a different leadership team came in and decided to go a different direction, and we're going to replatform the whole stack and mishmash the whole team. And basically 5 to 7 years of somebody's work just went right out the window. And I felt like if that ever happened to me, I would behave really poorly. And so I was like, why don't I work in a place where I can shield myself from those negative outcomes? So that's why I stayed in consulting. And I like helping people whatever way I can. So.
Well, that sounds like a great note to wrap up today's session on. Everyone who knows me knows that I'm a stickler for ending these things on time. So thank you so much to our panelists, Callie, Megan, and Michael for sharing their thoughts and experiences today. Thanks to the folks who have attended and participated in the chat. Big thank you to Caitlin, who kept incredible notes throughout the Slack conversation. So big round of applause. Woo! We will share the recording on YouTube probably tomorrow. There are some questions we didn't get to in the chat, so feel free to continue to engage there. And then we always have the careers channel where we can have conversations about this and other things that are career related whenever people are around. All right, thanks so much, folks. Have a good Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.